Hello and welcome to the Gaggle Challenge. And if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Szamuely. Here with me today, of course, is Johnny Apple, which is we have this rare honor of his joining us, and colleague Peter Lavelle. So, Peter, today this meeting in Switzerland is wrapping up. This is the peace conference to which some 90 states.
78 in the end, I think.
How much was it?
78.
78. Okay. All right. I thought
maybe it's even less than that.
Maybe it's less than that. Then the stories that I read were around 90, but maybe.
I was invited. Okay. I mean, or people that initially accepted an invitation. I think.
All right. Obviously the NATO countries were heavily represented, and there was a communique. We've seen the draft of the communique, but there was kind of an interesting little interlude at this conference, which was the statement of Polish President Duda, who was quite remarkable. So let's just first of all see what Duda had to say. And here we have, I want to put it right, so he says, this war is not only brutal and full of crimes, it is imperial and colonial in its nature. The Kremlin intends to enslave the Ukrainian people, their children, use Ukraine's resources, destroy their culture, and deprive Ukraine of the right to freely choose its development path and security arrangements. And then he goes on, in the part of the world which I represent, Russia is often called the, quote, prison of nations. Remember, this is when he saw Russia is often called, this is a prison of nations. That was Lenin. So I wonder whether Duda is happy to refer to Lenin, but that's what Lenin called it, the prison of nations. And says,
well, and it is often in the context of when. I mean, it's not now. It was during.
Well, no, but that's not what he's saying. No, he says now. Now. That's what
I mean. That's what I mean. I mean, he's saying.
Oh, you mean that? Yeah. Yes, Lenin was referring to it in the 19th century,
right?
But Duda is referring to it as now, and because it is home to almost 200 ethnic groups, most of which became residents of Russia as a result of the methods used in Ukraine today. Russia remains the largest colonial empire in the world, which, unlike European powers, has never undergone the process of decolonization and has never been able to deal with the demons of its past. As members of the international community, we have to finally say there is no more space for colonialism in the modern world.
Well, there you have it, George. This is all about decolonization.
Of Russia.
Of Russia. Okay. Well, I don't know if he came up on it on his own or he got it from a white paper in the State Department. But hats off to the guy. He's redefining the narrative here.
Well, exactly, and that's the thing. This is the president of Poland. This is someone who is very much in good standing in NATO. He's part of the Weimar Triangle with France and Germany. And he's deemed to be the new NATO, as opposed to the old NATO, because, and he's openly saying that the goal should be the disintegration of Russia.
Right. Well, I mean, one thing he doesn't mention, obviously, it's kind of floating around here. All right, let's say almost 200 ethnic groups. Has anybody asked them if they want to be in Russia or not?
No, that's it. But of course, he doesn't care. That's the whole point. I mean, the goal is we move in and we just create these all the tensions. If they don't want to be against Russia, we'll just set them off against one another, get them fighting one another, and then let the chips fall where they may. Just wants basically the destruction of this country.
Well, it's interesting here. I mean, when he's talking about there should be no space for colonialism in the modern world. I think you could say NATO is a colonial project.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's exactly right, and that's the point, because if you're going to go to I mean, it goes back to your point, which is this: you're saying it's 200 ethnic groups. Okay, they say, yeah, there are 200 ethnic groups, and they want to leave Russia. Is that your thesis? They want to leave Russia. They want to go their own way.
Well, obviously that's the
That's exactly, yeah. That's what
well, I
he's.
mean,
But
let's
who?
follow
But
the
who is he
sentence. We
speaking
have
for? Yeah, go.
Prison of Nations, 200 ethnic groups. Connect the dots,
Connect the
everybody.
dots, exactly. So then he goes on. I want to state clearly, it is solely Moscow who is responsible for the war, but it does not mean that Russia is acting alone. I am referring here to the shameful role that Putin's puppet in Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, has played in this war while oppressing his own people. It's very strange he calls him Putin's puppet, because he's really not anybody's puppet. I mean,
Nope.
he's a big pain in the neck for Putin on many occasions, but
Well,
it's hard to describe him as a puppet.
if you really want to encapsulate Alexander Lukashenko's entire political career, he's always somebody's pain in the neck.
Right, right, right.
Well, I mean, didn't Pompeo make an homage to?
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's right.
yeah.
That's right, exactly. Yeah. I want to remind everyone that not only did he allow Russian army to attack Ukraine from the territory of Belarus, but he also initiated a series of hybrid attacks against the Baltic states and Poland's eastern borders, attacks which have lasted 3 years. I don't think that's true, incidentally, about Russian army attacking Ukraine through Belarus. I think that's one of those things that's been repeated ad nauseum. I don't think that's true. I don't think the Russian forces ever came through Belarus.
Well, I would say maybe on a technicality, I don't want to sound like a lawyer here, but Belarus and Russia are in a union. Okay.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of like saying that, New York has its own foreign policy opposed to Washington or something like that.
To be honest, I don't think Lukashenko knew about the coming of the special military operation.
I don't think he did.
I don't think Lavrov knew, so I don't think Lukashenko was in the loop. So
it's interesting. I mean, why is it picking on Belarus of all countries?
right, and then he goes, and also, he initiated a series of these hybrid attacks against the Baltic states. It's very interesting. I mean, it's always fascinating when they start talking about these immigrants. So, the other day, we had Hungary getting thumped by the European Court of Justice for apparently not allowing migrants to come in and make their asylum application in Hungary. That's EU law. They come in and they have to make their application. You can't just keep them out. But here, apparently, how dare migrants start coming in through Belarus? I mean, remember the hysteria about Finland. Russia is weaponizing migrants. Migrants are coming into the country through Russia. We're closing all our ports of entry. What about the whole EU asylum? You have the right to ask for asylum.
Since you have a bird's eye view of all this, let's put Hungary in your mind, on the map, the borders of it. Well, if someone wants asylum in Hungary, wouldn't they apply for asylum in the country in which they're leaving to enter Hungary?
Right.
I mean, isn't that EU law?
Well, that's right. The thing was that they were coming in through Serbia, and that's exactly what Hungary's argument was. Well, you apply, first country you come to as well. No, you have them. If they want to come to Hungary, they got to come to Hungary. But Hungary said, all right, well, you can apply at a Hungarian consulate somewhere. No, they gotta come in through onto Hungarian territory. You can't keep them out of Hungarian territory.
So Angela Merkel in 2015, essentially paraphrasing, open the gates, and the Hungarians have to pay for it.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Right. I want to make sure I got that straight, George.
That's right. And then he goes on, Ukraine, as a victim of this aggression, has the full right to defend its sovereignty and independence by any means that are in accordance with the international law. And it is the obligation of the entire international society to spare no effort in supporting Kiev in its struggles The peace agreement that will eventually be worked out has to ensure the sovereignty of Ukraine, full practical capabilities to defend its independence, as well as free and unimpeded right to shape its internal and foreign policies without Moscow's influence.
Well, it's interesting that we have the Polish president talking about how Ukraine is a victim of aggression. Well, Radek Sikorski was in Kiev in February of 2014,
Right.
part of brokering a European Union deal for political reform, okay, meaning early elections in Ukraine. What kind of government like Poland is talking about adhering to international law and agreements? I mean, Poland's fingerprints were all over that, and then they demurred to a coup. They should have condemned the coup. They were in a process of political reform.
Right.
I mean, it's so empty, George. It's so empty. And once you become a member of NATO, just ask Viktor Orban, what kind of sovereignty do you have?
You don't have any sovereignty. I mean, you're because you are now part of a military alliance. And while he said, Hungary doesn't have to take part, and so on, but Hungary is still a part of that military alliance. So if there is a war, Hungary is still going to be, a reasonable target. I mean, Russia will probably go out of its way if there's a war not to hit Hungary, but since it's part of the military alliance and it can't guarantee that Hungary will not be used by the alliance in a war, it will be a legitimate target. So if you're in an alliance, that's it. Your sovereignty is gone.
Well, okay, let's give a possible example. If there's a control a center, using satellites and surveillance and all that, if there's a command and control center in Hungary, sorry, it's a legitimate target.
Exactly. Also, while Hungarian land may not be used to transport munitions and weapons to Ukraine, its airspace may well be used. So again, if its airspace is used, then Hungarian airspace could well be under attack. So
yeah, said many times here, Hungary is a wonderful piece of real estate for many reasons.
That's right. But anyway, so then this conference is ongoing, and then we have the draft of a resolution. And let me show you. This is from Reuters. Reuters says, we've seen this draft.
I'm grateful it's only 4 slides. These things tend to get long sometimes. Go ahead.
Yes, that's right. This one's a short one. The next one may be a little bit longer, but we don't have to go through the next one in too great a detail. But this is, we had a fruitful, comprehensive, and constructive exchange of various views on the pathways towards a framework for comprehensive, just, and lasting peace based on blah, blah. In particular, we reaffirm our commitment to refraining from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state. I mean, again, these are empty promises.
Well, I mean, also it's I don't know, maybe you could put it into words for me, Drew. What standing does this conference have?
None.
None.
It has no standing at all.
I mean, it's like a group of people that are having a very expensive buffet in the Swiss Alps.
It is great, isn't it, that these characters, these Schultz and Macron, they go from one international powwow to another. We had the D-Day commemoration, then they go to the G7, and now they're in Switzerland. I mean, this is.
And they got the Washington gig coming up.
And they got the Washington gig coming up. It's a wonderful life. So threat of the principles of sovereignty, independence, territorial, including Ukraine, within their internationally recognized borders, including territorial waters, and the resolution of disputes through peaceful means as principles of international law. And
well, I think, I'm sorry, George, if you can go back just real quick. If you can go back real quick here. And the resolution of disputes through peaceful means as principles of international law. Yeah, Minsk 1 and 2. It was recognized by the United Nations Security Council.
Right. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. There was the peaceful resolution, and of course, and as we'll discuss, because we're also going to talk about Putin's major speech at the Russian Foreign Ministry, in which he went into some detail about the entire diplomatic history of the conflict with Ukraine. And in particular, the resolution of dispute. There was we were very close to a resolution in early 2022.
Well, and all places, everyone, quite interesting. I don't understand the timing. Nothing is a coincidence here. But the New York Times has released documents about the Istanbul process. It's really quite interesting.
Right.
As the conference is going on. Unfortunately, for readers of that rag, this may be news. George and I were talking about it in real time.
Real time. We were talking about
real time
2 years ago. This is classic New York Times. Big story. You think, well, we've all known about this for 2 years. We've discussed it. I don't know how many podcasts we've done on the subject over the past 2 years. And so the big New York Times weighs in. But of course, they do it at a time when it's already it's over. It's a done deal. It's already history now. I mean, there's very little point in going on about it now. So when it's safe, then the New York Times can weigh in with a long piece. And then you think, hey, but we were very close, and you were dismissing it, and you were saying, oh, well, Putin's thing, Putin wants war, Putin wants this, Putin wants that.
But for those of us, and it's a small group of people that were following it in real time, and then we have in the last news cycle, the New York Times reporting this as if it was news. It's kind of like a documentary I watched last week where Himmler was making entreaties to Churchill and to Roosevelt. Maybe he could take over. He could be his signature could end the Nazi regime, and he could be, well, that's all kind of, with a glass of wine, oh, that's kind of I didn't know that. That's an oddity. But that has nothing to do with the end of that conflict, and it has nothing to do with how we think about that conflict today. It's just one of those historical oddities.
Well, that's the point, that now it's safe to write about it because it's over. It's over and done with. And I remember the same thing happened during the war in Bosnia. There was an agreement that was reached in April and May of 1992 between the three parties in Bosnia-Herzegovina, and basically the Americans sabotaged it. They told the Muslim leader, Izetbegovic, hey, if you don't like it, why sign it? Much like Boris Johnson said it to Zelensky, if you don't like it, why sign it? This was in 1992. And then in 1994, in grand style, the New York Times wrote about, well, we were very close to peace in 1994. Yeah, and everyone has known about this. We're very close to peace. And it was the Americans who sabotaged it. And now it's too late. I mean, that's gone. That was 2 years ago. But this is just classic New York Times. And we furthermore have a common vision on the following crucial aspects. Firstly, any use of nuclear energy and nuclear installations must be safe, secure, safeguarded, and environmentally sound. Ukrainian nuclear power plants and installations, including Zaporozhye nuclear power, must operate safely and securely under the full sovereign control of Ukraine and in line with IAEA principles and under its supervision.
Interesting, George, that they would start with that one.
Yes,
with these stories from the main broadsheet, the Zaporozhye nuclear plant is being shelled. Well, Russia occupies it. Right. It is running it.
Right.
But it's unclear who's shelling it. I mean,
right.
This is absurd.
Right.
This is absurd. And it's interesting to me that they mention this here is because the only threat to that nuclear power plant is Kiev.
I agree. Absolutely right. Any threat or use of nuclear weapons in the context of ongoing war is inadmissible. Then, secondly, global food security depends on uninterrupted manufacturing and supply of food products. In this regard, free, full, and safe commercial navigation, as well as access to seaports in the Black and Azov Seas, are critical. Attacks on merchant ships, imports, and along the entire route, as well as against civilian ports and civilian port infrastructure, are unacceptable. Well, you know, that's sort of ridiculous. I mean, the problem for a long time has been a food glut, because Ukraine is getting its food out through the Black Sea, and Ukraine is dumping its food products in Europe. I mean, you know, we have protesting farmers because of a food glut, and they're unable to stay in business. Food security must not be weaponized in any way. Ukrainian agricultural products should be securely and freely provided to interested third parties. And then thirdly, all prisoners of war must be released by complete exchange. All deported and unlawfully displaced Ukrainian children and all other Ukrainian civilians who are unlawfully detained must be returned to Ukraine, which seems again very strange. I mean, prisoners of war is what you get when there's peace. I mean, that's when you get exchanges of prisoners of war. I mean, you don't get just, I mean, they have had them on an ad hoc basis, but it's still, I mean, it just seems the wrong way of going about it, you know, to start talking about prisoners of war before there's actually a peace.
Well, I mean, I'm sorry, George. I mean, this conference has been convened because there's an existential threat to the existence of the Ukrainian state. And this is what they come up with?
Well, that's a very interesting aspect, because the whole purpose of this conference, it was said in the media, was to get the rest of the world on board for the Zelensky peace plan. Now, as we talked about the 10-point peace plan, which that's what the media refer to it as the peace plan, of course, entails Russian capitulation, because it entails war crimes trials for Russians. But you notice that this is all they've come up with. They haven't got the, you know, they haven't brought this. Now you say 78 countries attended. They don't have them. They're not going to agree to those things. They're not going to agree to the 10-point peace plan. NATO may, but the others, who are the non-NATO powers, were not going to sign on to anything that, you know, entailed war crimes trials for Russians, because they knew that that's just a non-starter.
Well, I hope the buffet was good, because
I'm sure it was.
They went all the way there for this.
Right.
I mean, this is Zoom call stuff.
That's right. And then, you know, United Nations Charter and so on. So that was the
wow.
That was that. And as you say, it really was kind of, you know, nothing. But that's all they could get, because otherwise they could not get the agreement of all the rest. They said they just wouldn't sign it.
Well, I mean, again, let's see this. Before George and I convened, I did a quick sampling of what major Western media outlets are saying. And progress has been made. There's unity on the global stage, blah, blah, blah. But George and I are the only ones that said, but this is what they actually agreed to. Nobody looked at the communique. Right. I'm seeing the communique for the first time right now, okay, with George, okay? Right. But I'd seen reports coming out in 2 or 3 days before this. This was the stuff that they were going to talk about, so it shouldn't have been a surprise to everyone. But what it does say, George, is not their strength and their unity. And it says everything about their disunity and their inability to come together and act as the international community. From what I understand, a lot of countries showed up out of threats from the U.S. Okay, well, that's send somebody. Okay,
well, that's really the thing, that, you know, when we talk about this 78, where you've got the NATO and the EU gang, plus you've got the usual characters who always vote with the United States at the United Nations. So you can, you know, get it up to, plus, you know, Japan, Australia, and the rest. All right, you can get it up to 50. And then you have to then latch on to get another 28. But those 28, they were never going to sign on to Zelensky's 10-point plan. I mean, that was, you know, Saudi Arabia wasn't going to sign on to that nonsense. So, and in fact, they kind of made the point in Switzerland, if you're going to have a peace conference, you're going to bring in both parties. You know, it kind of vitiates the purpose of a peace conference if one of the parties is not in attendance.
Well, George, just prior to the opening of that conference, and I know we're going to talk about it shortly, but just as a preamble, Vladimir Putin addressed Russia's diplomats, and he presented to the world.
Right. Well, we're going to talk about
that. Wait, before you start, as a juxtaposition, what we heard in Switzerland, he presented a starting point. I give it back to you. They didn't do that in Switzerland.
Right. That's right. That's right. And that's what we have. You see, the Western powers are presenting their own absolutist position, which is which is in effect the Zelensky peace plan. But the rest of the world were never going to sign on to that, and that's why this is a very dishonest exercise. So now they say, oh, well, we're going to have another peace conference, maybe in Saudi Arabia. I will bet you that there's not going to be another peace conference. I think this was such a dud. Saudi Arabia is not going to host, a ridiculous exercise in whatever 3-4 months time, and because what's the point? I mean, it's just.
Well, I mean, of course, the Zelensky regime was highly critical, overly critical. If you want to talk about diplomacy of China, do you think the Chinese are going to give this a second thought? No way. And the Saudi foreign minister, who has a very high profile right now because of what's going on in Gaza, he spoke basically in undiplomatic terms. If Russia isn't there, what's the point? I'm paraphrasing. Okay, I mean, it was just very matter of fact. So you're right, and this whole exercise was in the works for a very long time. Okay, and maybe it was a junior assistant alternate diplomat that said, yeah, I'll take the free trip. Yeah, why not? Okay, but it's you're not you can't step in the same river twice. Okay,
right. That's right. But anyway, so we had this discussion or a talk given by Putin at the Russian Foreign Ministry on Friday, and it was very interesting because he was very specific. It was really about Ukraine, about NATO, about the negotiations, the diplomacy. And while he said a few things that we knew, which he hadn't said before, I kind of thought this was interesting because he was free. He didn't talk the stuff that I get so tired of, these banalities about multipolarity and the global South and everything. I mean, which I just find I know somewhat.
Yeah, but we're not the audience for that. It's
right. Okay, but
yeah,
but I kind of I like the fact that this is specific because we, or at least I've criticized. I said Russia hasn't really done a particularly good job presenting its position to the world, and I take the point that hey, yeah, but the media, it's very hard to break into the Western media market because it's in block. But I thought this was good, and then he kind of explained Russia's position. So it's up to us and it's up to everybody really to try to get these points out and say, well, this is Russia's position, because most of the West has no idea what Russia's position is. Just absolutely no idea. They just because they just listened with the BBC, CNN, MSNBC. But anyway, here is the. So he started off here with he gives the background about the Cold War. I know you're getting worried about the number of slides, but just
no, I was turning my head, so I don't know how many there are, so I can't worry about it.
We're not going to go through all of them. So here, he talks about the end of the Cold War. And then, another approach prevailed. The Western powers, led by the United States, believed they had won the Cold War and had the right to independently determine how the world should be organized. And then he goes on that the promises that were given, the same thing about the 1980s and early 90s, about not including new members of the bloc, were quietly forgotten. And then again, we have consistently, both in the 1990s and later, pointed out the erroneous course chosen by the Western elites. But how Russia has repeatedly talked about a European security treaty. I mean, and talked about in 2008 and then in 2021. But all our attempts, multiple attempts to reason with our interlocutors, explanations, exaltations, warning, requests on our part, did not find any response at all. and then goes on. Meanwhile, it quickly became clear that the Western scheme, proclaimed to be the only correct one for ensuring security and prosperity in Europe, does not actually work. And it talks about the Balkans and so on, all the rest of the foreign policy. And then he goes on, we are witnessing the collapse of the Euro-Atlantic security system, and continues. And then, so what do we need to do? And then he talks about, we need to establish a dialogue with all potential participants in the future security system. And then we need to proceed from the fact that the future security architecture is open to all Eurasian countries that wish to take part in its creation. It goes on. In this regard, let me make a small digression. The danger to Europe does not come from Russia. The main threat to Europeans is their critical and ever increasing, almost total dependence on the United States in the military, political, technological, ideological, and information spheres. And then sometimes one gets the impression that ruling European politicians or representatives of the European bureaucracy are more afraid of falling out of favor with Washington than of losing their trust of their own people, their own citizens.
Yeah, the recent elections.
The recent elections show, and the fact that they intend to make no changes. Humiliation of Macron, the humiliation of Scholz, but no changes. And then again, it talks about Europe. There's this, and it talks about the simple, actual, obvious thing was perfectly understood by a politician of truly pan-European and global scale. And then de Gaulle spoke a lot about this in the post-war years. I also remember well how in 1991, during a conversation in which I had the opportunity to personally participate at the time, Helmut Kohl emphasized the importance of the partnership between Europe and Russia. I hope that sooner or later, new generations of European politicians will return to this heritage.
It's interesting he mentions that, because that's something George and I have talked about on a number of occasions.
Right. You also wonder, go on.
He had so much hope for Russia-German relations. That was really the apple of his eye. And you could see it in the early years of his term in president. That was something he really put a lot of attention and focus on. And he, I guess he had false hope in Merkel. Merkel is a complete catastrophe in retrospect. Okay.
Right.
I mean,
right. No, that's right. But you kind of wonder, though, how sincere were people like Helmut Kohl? Was this just something he said at the time because they were so desperate to get that reunification that they were ready to promise the earth just to get what they wanted? Said, yeah, whatever you want, we'll do it. And then they never really intended to keep those promises.
It's a good question. Oh, it may answer itself by his successors. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, how much is German foreign policy based on one man, one person? Right. I think we would probably be, we could say cautiously that no, it's more of a function of a political elite.
Right. Yeah, I think so. Because I remember meeting some of those people around Kohl in 1990. They were very cold figures. They were cold and calculating. I got a sense with them. They always had a plan in mind for what they were going to do to the Soviet Union. Because I remember even talking to them. This is 1990. Hey, well, why don't you offer NATO membership to the Soviet Union? Oh, no, we can't possibly do that. No. Why not? Why was this absolutely out of the question? Out of the question. Why? Why is it out of the question? All right. These were the people
right.
At a lower level. These are people, head of this ministry, head of that ministry. But they were very cold, icy people.
You have to think about it, everyone. I mean, think of someone, and people involved in this are careerists in one form or another. Okay, NATO was a comfy gig. Prior to 1991, it wasn't really talked much about. It was there. It was, George aptly is described as a supper club. I think that's absolutely perfect. But and then well, we're gonna shut down the supper club. No, let's not do that. Okay, we have other things to do. And again, George is kind of on the margins of it here. I don't know if we can do a deep dive now or later. But really, what was the Germans' real attitude about the end of the Soviet Union? Was it payback time? Was it getting even?
Yeah.
I don't know. I wasn't,
Well, I think it was a mix of things. I mean, look, I mean,
yeah.
as always, I think at the mid level, I think you have very smart, very icy kind of people who are thinking long term ahead. Cole was a kind of a genial fellow. The guy who was at the top, who's a politician, glad hander. That's how you got to the top, being a good glad hander. He probably did think, hey, we're going to have good relations with Russia. That's not necessarily what people at the mid level thought. And they knew what they had to do. They were during the 1970s, during the years of Ostpolitik, no one was allowed to say anything critical about the Soviet Union, because they were so determined on basically trying to get that reunification. They said, well, we've got to keep in with the Soviet Union. So they made this drastic switch from the 1960s, when they were very belligerent towards the Soviet Union. Suddenly, everybody was Ostpolitik. Don't ever say anything mean and nasty about the Soviet Union.
Well, again, this is kind of self-referential. I mean, we can surmise what they had in their mind at the highest level and the middle level, but historical facts tell us a lot. As soon as we had reunification, Germany started minding other people's business in the
Exactly.
breakup of Yugoslavia.
Exactly. In no time at all. Boom.
And
It's like overnight. So, anyway, he goes on. Third, to promote the Eurasian security system. And then fourth, we will let the broad discussion, new system of bilateral and multilateral guarantees. And he says, well, this may be unrealistic, but who knows what's going to happen in the future. And then a fifth, an important part of it would be the issues: economy, social well-being, and then he says Western countries have frozen part of the Russian assets and currency reserves. Now they are thinking about how to establish at least some legal basis to finally appropriate them. We talked about this legal basis. They got their lawyers saying, hey, could you come up with some legal mumbo jumbo to suggest that we're acting in accord with international law.
But we need lawyers to do that. It means you're breaking the law. That's my default position. Sorry.
That's right. But despite all the chicanery, theft will certainly remain theft and will not go unpunished. And then this destroys the system. And then but I want to say right away, the crisis connected with Ukraine is not a conflict between two states, much as between two peoples. The events in Ukraine are a direct result of the global and European developments of the late 20th, early 21st centuries, of the aggressive, unceremonious, and absolutely adventurous policy that the West has been pursuing and is pursuing all these years, long before the special military operation began.
Well
that has
said.
to be true.
Well said.
Yeah.
Very well said.
Exactly. These elites of Western countries, as I've already said, today, after the end of the Cold War, they took a course towards further geopolitical restructuring of the world, hence the policy of containing our country. The goals of this policy are already openly declared by some figures in the USA and Europe. And then we talked, openly, we had Duda, President Duda of Poland, he outlined it. And, he just blurted this out,
Well, George, that's interesting. I mean, I know what Putin said at the foreign ministry, okay? And there's some things really interesting to talk about. But, and there will be those that will do their due diligence and actually read what he had to say. But how much media coverage, any coverage of Duda's comments will there be made? I think we're probably standing alone.
Right. We are. That's right. We are. And that's of course deliberate, because if you gave publicity to that, then you say, yeah, oh, but I thought what about Putin's paranoia? Then you say, we're always talking about Putin's he's paranoid. Oh no, this is all paranoia. But even when we talk about Putin's speech, and I think Gagler should go to the Kremlin website and look at the speech. It's an important speech, and read it for themselves. I mean, these are slides. I mean, we're just going through quickly here. But it's worth looking at because it's a historical record. I mean, at some point, people will be looking back on this war and the diplomatic history of this war, and the the engagement of all the parties. who knows what's going to happen next? But we're creating a historical record here that historians are going to look at in the future. He says, actually, the dismemberment of the Soviet Union and Russia has been talked about for a long time. Everyone sitting in this hall knows this well. And in implementing this strategy, Western countries have taken the line of absorption and military political development of territories close to us. There have been 5 and now 6 waves of NATO expansion. They have tried to turn Ukraine into their bridgehead to make it anti-Russia. To achieve these goals, they have invested money, resources, bought politicians and entire parties, rewrote history and educational programs, fed and raised groups of neo-Nazis and radicals. They did everything to undermine our interstate ties, to separate and set our peoples against each other. And then he talks here about the Southeast Ukraine, their historical relations with Russia, and then again, it was not possible to distort this historical identity, the consciousness of the majority of the people in the southeast of Ukraine, to eradicate from them, including from the younger generations, a good attitude towards Russia and the sense of our historical community. And so they again decided to act by force, simply to break the people of the southeast, not caring about their opinion. For this, they arranged, organized, and financed, of course, took advantage of the difficulties and complexities of an internal political nature in Ukraine. And then he talks again about how they did this, the waves of pogroms and violence and murders. Power in Kiev had already been completely seized and usurped by radicals. Their aggressive nationalist slogans, including the rehabilitation of Nazi henchmen, were elevated to the rank of state ideology. A policy was proclaimed towards the abolition of the Russian language in the state and public spheres. Pressure on Orthodox believers and interference in the affairs of the church increased, which ultimately led to a schism. And then he talks about again. And first of all, the new authorities in Kiev began to prepare a blow against the Russian-speaking Crimea, which at one time in 1954, as you know, was transferred to Ukraine in violation of all norms and laws and procedures.
Even those in force in the Soviet Union.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah. And then in Kharkov, Kherson, Odessa, Zaporozhye, Donetsk, Lugansk, peaceful protests against the coup d'etat began to be suppressed. Terror was unleashed by the Kiev regime and nationalist groups. There's probably no need to remember. Everyone had already remembers what happened in those regions. And then May 2014, the referendums. Again, we said this before many times. Russia did not recognize the results of those referendums. They held the referendums on Donetsk and Lugansk, and Russia did not recognize them. They committed themselves to Minsk, which means the reintegration of these regions into Ukraine. And then it goes on. And in this regard, this is quite interesting because he again brings up the issue of Kosovo. And he uses that particularly against the West. So he says, you brought this on because you did this to Kosovo and you were very pleased with yourself. And we're using your arguments. This is your arguments. We were against this. We opposed what you were doing in Kosovo. You ignored all of our arguments. And now we're going to say, yeah, the same thing applies. And it says, the precedent that Western countries themselves was created that in a completely similar situation, they recognize as legitimate the separation of Kosovo from Serbia in 2008. This was followed by the well-known decision of the International Court of Justice in 2010, which says, no general prohibition on the unilateral declaration of independence follows from the practice of the Security Council, and following, quote, general international law does not contain any applicable prohibition on the declaration of independence. So they didn't exactly say it was legal. They just said there are no universal principles. Maybe, maybe not. But the NATO countries, they immediately, yay, we've got a vindication from the World Court. They were congratulating themselves. And I remember, the fantastic, we won. We got, you know, the world court ruled in our favor.
No, they punted.
They punted. They punted. But you know, now Putin said, yeah, okay. So essentially,
Okay.
any part of a country can secede, and you can't say it's illegal. They just say, well, you know, there are no hard and fast rules telling us whether it's legal or illegal.
If it's 2014 or 2022, it works for me.
Right?
It works for me.
Yes, that's right. And then he goes on. So did these republics, Donetsk and Lugansk, declare their independence? Well, yes, of course, yes. The question cannot even be considered differently. What did the regime in Kiev do in this situation? They completely ignored the choice of the people and launched a full-scale war against the new independent state, the People's Republic of Donbass, using aviation, artillery, and tanks. Bombings and shellings of peaceful cities and acts of intimidation began, and so on. Which incidentally is also much, you know, Serbia did not use force against Kosovo after 2008, did not try to use force to try to bring it back. And then it says, I would like to emphasize again, Russia did not start the war. It was the Kiev regime. I repeat, after the residents of a part of Ukraine declared their independence in accordance with international law, that began military actions and continues them. This is aggression if we do not recognize the rights of these people living in these territories to declare their independence. And then it talks about 2014, and it talks about the, you know, when we know about the events, and then to stop the bloodshed, Russia made the usual calls for negotiations, and they began with the participation of Kiev and the representatives of the Donbass with the assistance of Russia, Germany, and France. The conversation was difficult, but nevertheless, as a result, the Minsk agreements were concluded. We took their implementation very seriously and hoped that we will be able to resolve the situation within the framework of the peace process and international law.
You know, it's interesting from people that you and I generally, more generally agree with. A little bit of a discussion going on right now. How seriously did the Russians take the Minsk process, which I think is kind of interesting, and I'd like to know more about it. The fact that Russia wasn't pursuing another agenda, at least one that is not discernible to me, I tend to think they did take it seriously. Okay.
I think so too. Yeah. Yeah. I agree. I think they took it seriously. And then, to be honest, I think they were very naive to take it because to me it was obvious that the West was just, you know, using the time. They were just simply marking time and building up the armed forces of Ukraine. I mean, it was clear that's what they were doing. They were basically using it to strengthen Ukraine. So by 2022, Ukraine was much stronger militarily than it had been in 2014.
Well, essentially, what was called the anti-terrorist operation against the Donbass, during that time, the people of the Donbass, with Russian help, obviously, destroyed the Ukrainian army. I mean, just humiliated it.
Yeah.
And so what we had from circa 2015, 2016 is the rebuilding from the ground up, essentially, of the Ukrainian military. And that was the NATOization of the military.
Exactly. Then he goes on, instead of a real peace process, instead of a policy of reintegration and national reconciliation, which Kiev loved to talk about, Donbass was shelled for 8 years. They staged terrorist attacks, murders, organized several severe blockade. All these years, the residents of Donbass were declared second-class citizens, subhumans. They were threatened with reprisals. They say, we will come and get even with everyone. What is this if not genocide in the center of Europe in the 21st century? And then...
and you know, if I could just impart here, this is very real because I was living in another place at the time, but there were cafes and restaurants that I would frequent, and almost all of the young people working there were refugees from the Donbass.
Right.
And since I'm such an early bird, I'd be first in the cafe for breakfast. I would say, hey, where are you from? You know, and they tell me, and the stories that they would tell. This, I mean, I felt scarred, let alone
Right,
they're the ones that witnessed it.
right,
Okay, really horrific. And for 8 years, it barely made it on the radar of the West
yeah,
in the media. It
right,
is really such a tragedy that there's just so underreported and
yeah.
intentionally so, obviously.
Yeah, no, exactly. And in fact, to the extent that he made it on the radar of the West, it was the other way. Oh, it
Yeah, it
was
was.
Russia was waging a war against Ukraine.
Well, I mean, I can remember on my program trying to explain to people, which it was mystified them, Russia's meddling in Ukrainian politics. And I would say, well, from the perspective of the people in the Donbass, Russia isn't meddling enough. They got to do more. And
Yeah,
I want to remind people, again, George and I weren't doing the podcast at the time, but the attitude the people had in the Donbass towards the Russian government was decidedly negative.
very negative. Yeah,
Okay, they
yeah,
were really angry.
yeah.
They were very angry. Why aren't you helping us? You have nice words for us, but
Right.
we're being slaughtered by the Kiev regime.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
and
No, that's
and,
right.
and much to his credit, I think it was at the beginning of last year, Putin was talking to some families that had lost fighters, soldiers in the conflict. They admitted that the Kremlin's policy at the time was probably um, 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 inappropriate for what was necessary. It was
Right, right. And there's other things. I mean, they withdrew from Mariupol in 2014. I mean, they had it. They withdrew from Mariupol. They didn't take Odessa. I mean, Odessa, where there was that horrific massacre in the trade union building, and yet, and Odessa is a Russian city, and they didn't take Odessa. So there's a lot of bad feeling about that. Anyway, and then at the end of 2021, beginning of 2022, the Minsk process was finally buried by Kiev and its Western patrons, and a massive strike on Donbass was again planned. A large group of Ukrainian armed forces were preparing to launch a new offensive on Lugansk and Donetsk, with ethnic cleansing and huge human casualties, hundreds of thousands of refugees. We had to prevent this catastrophe, protect people, and we could not make any other decision.
And to back that up, everyone, if you want to, I was going to say independently. Well, I mean, the OSCE acquitted itself very badly in this process. They were obviously very pro-NATO and very pro-Kiev. But if you look at the point of contact, the amount of activity of missiles flying in one direction or the other was intensifying in December and January 2021, 2022. With the vast majority of the activity coming from Ukraine going into the Donbass. So Putin's observation is borne out by the facts. Okay, look at the OSCE and their reporting of the conflict at the time.
Right. And then Russia's finally recognized Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics. After all, we did not recognize them for 8 years. We were always hoping to come to an agreement. The result is not known. And on February 21, 2022, we concluded treaties of friendship and cooperation and mutual assistance with these republics, which we recognize that did the People's Republics have the right to turn to us for support if we recognize their independence? And did we have the right to recognize their independence just as they had the right to declare their sovereignty in accordance with the articles and decisions of the World Court that I mentioned? And then it talks about, and so we did in full compliance with international law and Article 51 of the UN Charter. That same Article 51 that Stoltenberg is repeatedly invoking dishonestly, incidentally. At the same time, we appealed to the Kiev authorities with a call to withdraw their troops from Donbass. I can tell you there were contacts. We immediately told them, remove the troops from there, and that will be the end of it. This proposal was almost immediately rejected, simply ignored, although it gave a real opportunity to close the issue peacefully. And then he talks about this. February the 24th, 2022, Russia was forced to announce the start of the special military operation, and then said that the goals that he announced to protect the people in the Donbass, restore peace, demilitarize, denazify Ukraine, and thereby avert threats from our state and restore the balance and security sphere in Europe. I think that should be to our state. That's a mistranslation. At the same time, we continued to consider achieving the stated goals by political and diplomatic methods as a priority. And then it talks about the talks first in Belarus. In Turkey, we tried to convey our main idea: respect the choice of the Donbass, the will of the people living there, withdraw the troops, stop shelling peaceful citizen towns. Nothing more is needed. We will resolve the remaining issues later. The answer was no, we will fight. Obviously, this was the command from the Western masters. And I will also say this now.
Well, and everyone, again, it's always important to point out that the process that was going on in Belarus, that later in Turkey, what were the Ukrainians being asked? Being asked to give up what they did not have. They did not have Lugansk. They did not have Don. They had part of it, but they did. In the main, they didn't. Okay, obviously they didn't have Crimea, and so after everything is been said and done over the last 2 years or so, you know, think back. They were being asked, say, well, the military operation can stop. You have to declare neutrality, and you have to give up what you don't have.
Right, but I think it's.
I mean, and you know, that is considering today, that was a good deal.
I think it was even better than that, because they didn't. Yeah. They were not even being asked to give up the Donbass, because essentially the way these agreements were framed, that we're going to leave that negotiation into the future. We'll discuss that later on in a kind of one-to-one framework of Putin and Zelensky. What they had to do immediately, what was the immediate goal, was to give up NATO membership. That was it. NATO membership, give it up once and for all. Give up any new plans for nuclear goals, and the demilitarization. That was the key thing. But all the rest, you know, Donetsk, Lugansk, that would be shelved for future talks. Even Crimea was going to be shelved for future talks. But the immediate thing was this NATO membership, because that was what it was about. And it was this ridiculous thing was the sticking point. You know, that they were not, that the West would not accept that you give up your ambition to join NATO.
Well, it's interesting because they wouldn't, because this was what they were on track to do. This is what initiated the special military operation. And now, because of the special military operation that has morphed into something much larger, they will never have NATO membership now, ever.
Well, I think while the war goes on, but as I say, I mean, I think if there's some kind of thing, a partition of Ukraine, I think, again, the western part of it, I think they will try to bring it in. I mean, I think that's still the goal. That's still the ambition.
For our viewers, that's always been.
That's our point of disagreement.
It's okay.
Okay.
I'm sure we're going to have to address it.
We're going to address it. Yeah, exactly. Anyway, at the time in February, March 2022, our troops, as is known, approached Kiev. There was a lot of speculation about this in Ukraine and the West. And then what do I want to say about this? Our formations were indeed stationed near Kiev. And then in essence, it was nothing more than an operation to force the Ukrainian regime to peace.
That's what George White said at the time, too.
That's right. And that's I think very important, that it was a way of putting pressure on them. And I think that was that was the key thing. That was the way they did that operation was to put the pressure on Kiev. Either Zelensky sort of runs away and then there's no government there, or they decide, hey, we've got to do something and sign an agreement. But that was always the goal. And then the troops were there to push the Ukrainian side to negotiations to try to find acceptable solutions, and thereby to stop the war unleashed by Kiev against Donbass back in 2014, and then to resolve the issues that pose a threat to the security of our country and to the security of Russia. But you see, this is the crucial point. Russia does not need any additional territory. That has never been the goal, because Russia has plenty of territory. There's a lot of land, a lot of resources. It just lacks security, particularly in the West. That's the real problem.
You can get on an airplane in Russia, fly in one direction for 12 hours, half the globe,
Right.
and look down. And George, there's a lot of empty
Yeah,
land.
that's right. That's exactly it.
George is right. They have plenty of land. They lack security. That's what you need to learn. That's what you need to understand.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's why, and people just don't understand it. However much one has to repeat it over and over again, they don't understand it. Oh, Putin wants this, that, Putin wants that. He doesn't need it. It does not need all this territory. It's security. It was, what were they doing after 1945 in Eastern Europe? It was security. They needed security. They were afraid of yet another invasion from the West. They'd already been invaded twice by Germany, and now they were waiting for a third invasion by Germany, United States, and so on.
Considering, this tail end of what George was saying, look how fast Nazi Germany was rehabilitated.
Yeah, very fast.
That was quick. That was quick.
That was very, very quick.
During the war, they had something was called the Morgenthau Plan, would just turn Germany into some kind of pastoral thing. Right. No. Krupps and all the rest of them, they were retooling, and they were with the United States. They were with the UK. They were with the French. Okay, they were retooling.
It's very
need Poland.
Yeah, it's very
one big headache the whole time. They were exports from the Soviet Union going to Poland, where people could have used it here in Russia. Okay. Right. I mean, if you want to think of the Soviet Union as an empire, the center was poorer than much of the periphery.
Right. And what's interesting is that the speed, you talk about the speed in which Nazi Germany was rehabilitated. At the very highest levels of NATO, there were generals who had served at the very highest level in the Wehrmacht.
Everybody, if you want, Mark Felden, Felton, Mark Felden, does these documentaries on the Second World War, has an excellent short video, NATO's Nazi generals.
Yeah, NATO's Nazi, exactly. Very quick. So the guy, the name escaped me. The German, he was head of NATO's military planning committee in the early 1960s. He had that position in the Wehrmacht, head of military planning for the Wehrmacht. So he wasn't just, he was a junior officer in the Wehrmacht. He was at the very highest level with Hitler. I mean, and now he has this very high level in NATO, not just in the Bundeswehr, in NATO.
And as the DDR was being formed, of course, they had to deal with having a military themselves. And they had, as someone once said, when it came to Nazi scientists, the West has their Nazi scientists and the Soviets have their Nazi scientists. Yeah. They actually hunted them down. They wanted their pick.
No.
But, where's the juxtaposition? Where were the Nazi generals in the DDR? It didn't work out.
Yeah. That's it. So you have to think, though, that the Soviet Union had every reason to fear what they used to call in famous communist propaganda about revanchist Germany, but in this case it would be Germany aligned with the United States. I mean, that was the fear, because West Germany would not be strong enough to take on the Soviet Union. But the West Germany aligned with Soviet Union, West Germany aligned with the United States within NATO. That's a different package.
Well, and everybody, let's just go down memory lane here. What came first, NATO or the Warsaw Pact?
Exactly. Yeah. So he talks now about this agreement that was that they were drafting in Istanbul. It says the document was called the Treaty on Permanent Neutrality and Security Guarantees for Ukraine. It was of a compromise nature, but its key points were in line with our fundamental demands and solved problems that were stated as basic even at the start of a special military operation, including, strange as it may seem, I draw attention to the demilitarization and denazification of Ukraine. And here we also managed to find complex solutions. They are complex, but they have been found. Namely, it was meant that a Ukrainian law would be adopted by banning Nazi ideology and any of its manifestations. Everything is written there. And
can you go back real quick, George? Okay. Namely, it was meant that a Ukrainian law would be adopted banning Nazi ideology in any of its manifestations. Well, other countries have done that, haven't they?
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, I think so. Yeah.
I,
Yep.
yes, yeah.
Unreasonable demand, George?
I don't think so. It's very interesting that they find this perfectly acceptable that Ukraine, erects statues to Stepan Bandera or renames street squares or Stepan Bandera. Would anyone find it acceptable if other countries started building statues, well, even to Horthy in Hungary or to Tiso in Slovakia? I don't think so. I mean, but so this is somehow outrageous
Would
demand.
you like to live next to the Himmler market?
Yeah, that's right. And then in addition, Ukraine, in exchange for international security guarantees, would limit the size of its armed forces, undertake obligations not to join military alliances, not allow foreign military bases, not to deploy them, and their contingents, not to conduct military exercises on its territory. Everything is written on paper. See, again, he doesn't make any mention here about the Donbass. He said that was what was in that agreement. So it's like that's all the agreement really was about. So it was this that the West rejected. It's not like, oh, we couldn't possibly allow Ukraine to lose its sovereign territory. That wasn't even under discussion. This was what was under discussion at Minsk and Istanbul.
What's key here also is the first part of the sentence, which we will never really know. Maybe we'll know after the conflict. In exchange for international security guarantees. That's a major concession.
Right. Right. That's right.
That means because the NATO and the US can also have some kind of standing when it comes to
right.
Ukraine.
That's right. Right.
That's a compromise. That's a huge compromise.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. We, for our part, also understanding Ukraine's security concern, agreed that Ukraine, without formally joining NATO, would receive guarantees almost identical to those enjoyed by members of the alliance. This was not an easy decision for us. So this is very important. This was not, that we were accepting it, but we recognize the legitimacy of Ukraine's demands to ensure its security, and in principle, did not object to the wording proposed by Kiev. These are the formulations proposed by Kiev, and we generally did not object to them, understanding that the main thing is to stop the bloodshed and war in the Donbass. But the point is, what they talk about the security guarantee is the issue. What was the sticking point? It said Russia, okay, fine, we will accept the security guarantees, but they can't be put into effect unless there was an agreement among all the parties.
Russia would have a veto right.
Exactly, everyone has a veto right, because otherwise we're back to where we started, which is then the Western powers can then go back and start using Ukraine, against Russia. So, and that's the whole point. In Russia, you can't use it against us, because therefore, there are, as you said, veto rights. And and the New York Times reported this the other day. Well, this is a completely unreasonable demand for Russia. Well, no, that's the whole point. That's the whole point of the thing, which is that you can't have the NATO powers using Ukraine against Russia. That's why there are the veto rights. On March the 29th, 2022, we withdrew our troops from Kiev because we were assured that it was necessary to create the necessary conditions for completing the political negotiation process, and that one of the parties cannot sign such agreements, as our Western colleagues said, with a gun to their temple. Okay, we agree to this too. This I've never understood. I've never understood this argument. I mean, when you've got leverage, you've got leverage. I don't understand why you would make a unilateral concession before you've signed anything. I mean, when you sign something, then you can go step by step and make these concessions, make your withdrawal. But I don't see what the point of making this withdrawal before the documents have actually been signed. Because it was a fraud.
It really, in my mind at least, it really speaks to the fact that the Kremlin honestly believed that they could avoid a full-scale war, that they could get a negotiated end, okay? I think that they really wanted that.
All right,
Okay,
I'm sure that that's true.
nobody here wanted a war with Ukraine. Nobody.
No, I'm sure that that's correct. I just think that that's a very naive step to withdraw your forces before you've actually got the agreement. When you've got the agreement, when it's all been signed, then you can withdraw your forces. But before it's been signed is strange. And particularly and it's now clear that Bucha was the setup, that was what they did. They created that, they withdrew their forces, and then it was all well planned in advance. Then they would stage this whole Bucha thing to provide the justification for not going ahead with this agreement that they were never going to go ahead with anyway. So, we found this massacre, which was obvious. So clearly Bucha was a fraud. I mean, it was we're familiar with the way NATO operates. These fraudulent massacres and so on. But that was it. I mean, of course, as soon as Russia withdrew, they would say, "Oh, look what we found."
Well,
out
I
of
mean,
nowhere.
again, the juxtaposition. George brings up a very good point. If you have the leverage, why make a concession? But it should. The way I read it, at least, is that Russia was trying to continue to show goodwill.
Yeah.
That we can stop this. Okay, and of course, the machinations around Bucha, which obviously is a fraud. I mean, we pointed that out in real time, and it shows the lack of goodwill on the other side.
Yeah, that's right. However, immediately the next day after the withdrawal of Russian troops from Kiev, the Ukrainian leadership suspended its participation in the negotiation process, staging a well-known provocation in Bucha, and abandoned the prepared version of the agreements. I think it's clear today why this dirty provocation was needed to somehow explain the rejection of the results that were achieved during the negotiations. The path to peace was again rejected. And then it says, by the way, on the topic of negotiation, I would like to make perhaps one more episode public in the audience. I haven't spoken about this publicly. After the Russian army occupied part of the Kherson and Zaporozhye regions, many Western politicians offered their mediation in the peaceful end of the conflict. One of them was on a working visit to Moscow in March the 5th. I'm assuming he's talking about Naftali Bennett. I don't know who else was in Moscow on March the 5th. And we accepted
I don't think any NATO country.
Yeah, I don't think it's that, but Naftali Bennett was there. And we accepted his mediation efforts, especially since during the conversation, he referred to the fact that he had secured the support of the leaders of Germany and France, as well as high-ranking US representatives. During the conversation, our foreign guest asked, an interesting episode, he said, if you are helping Donbass, why are Russian troops in the south of Ukraine, including the Kherson and Zaporozhye regions? The answer from our side was that such was the decision of the Russian General Staff to plan the operation. And today I will add that the plan was to bypass part of the fortified areas that the Ukrainian authorities built in Donbass over 8 years, primarily to liberate Mariupol. Then a clarification followed from a foreign colleague, a professional person, to give him his due. Will our Russian troops remain in Kherson and Zaporozhye regions, and what will happen to these regions after the achievement of the special military operation? To this, I responded that in general, I do not rule out preservation of the Ukrainian sovereignty over these territories, however, on the condition that Russia will have a strong land connection with Crimea. So he's saying here that there was never a plan to take Kherson and Zaporozhye. That was not part of the plan. The plan was, I mean, obviously the demilitarization and neutrality of Ukraine, but then the Donbass. But the important thing here was the land bridge to Crimea.
Pretty limited goals, George.
Very limited goals, yeah. And the land bridge for Crimea, that was always obvious that they needed that. Otherwise, it would always be vulnerable. And then that is, Kiev must guarantee the so-called easement, Russia's legally formalized right of access to Crimean Peninsula through the Kherson and Zaporozhye regions. This was a major political decision, and of course, naturally, in the final version, it would not be adopted individually, but only after consultation with the Security Council, with other structures, of course, after discussion with citizens, the public of our country, and above all, with the residents of the Kherson and Zaporozhye
So,
regions.
George, there was no grand plan.
I don't think so, no.
I don't think so. Yeah.
No, I don't think so.
And why we should take this at face value? We have no reason to doubt this. Okay.
No, I don't think so at all. I mean, I think the plan was to force Kiev to make this, sign an agreement about neutrality, denuclearization, a commitment never to join NATO, and then all the other issues about the Donbass later on. But the Kherson and Zaporozhye was never part of the plan. I mean, that would only changed in September. And obviously the land bridge to Crimea, just to ensure the security of Crimea. Ultimately, that's what we did. We asked the people themselves and held referendums. That was in September. And we did what the people decided, including the Kherson and Zaporozhye regions and so on. And then at that time, in March 2022, the negotiating partner announced that he was going to go to Kiev in the future to continue the conversation, now with colleagues in the Ukrainian capital. We welcome this, as well as attempts to find a peaceful resolution to the conflict in general, and then because every time, blah, blah. However, in Ukraine, as we later learned, the services of the Western mediator were not accepted. So that was Naftali Bennett, forget it. But on the contrary, as we learned, they accused him of taking the pro-Russian positions in rather harsh form. I must say, those are the details. So, and then now, as I already said, the situation has changed radically. Residents of the Kherson region and Zaporozhye expressed their position during referendums. The Kherson and Zaporozhye regions, as well as the Donetsk and Lugansk, became part of the Russian Federation. There can be no talk of violating our state unity. The will of the people to be with Russia is unshakable. The issue is forever closed and is no longer discussed. Well, that's interesting. That's quite a categorical statement he's saying here. The issue is forever closed. Okay.
Well, again, it's no coincidence that this happened hours before the charade in the Swiss Alps. Okay. I mean, if you want to talk about having peace, this is our side of the ledger. Right. We got to deal with it. Okay.
That's right. That's right. And this is
actually quite professional to do that.
That's right. And this is where he goes on. Finally, he gets to the point. As you know, we were naturally not invited to the meeting in Switzerland. We were not. After all, in essence, these are not negotiations, but the desire of a group of countries to continue to push their line to resolve issues that directly affect our interests and security at their own discretion. In this regard, I would like to emphasize, without Russia's participation, without an honest and responsible dialogue with us, it is impossible to reach a peaceful solution in Ukraine and in global European security in general. And then, meanwhile, the West ignores our interest while prohibiting Kiev from holding negotiations. All the time, hypocritically calls us to some kind of negotiations. It looks simply idiotic. On the one hand, they are prohibited from holding negotiations with us, and we are called to negotiate, and even hinted that we refuse to negotiate. Which they always repeat, yeah, Russia refuses to negotiate. Well, yeah, Russia's not going to negotiate a capitulation. I mean, you don't negotiate a capitulation unless you have to, and there's no, you don't have to. Anyway, then he goes on. But first of all, to begin with, we would give Kiev the order to lift the ban, the self-ban on negotiation with Russia. And second, we are ready to sit down at the negotiating table even tomorrow. We understand all the peculiarities of the legal situation, but there are legitimate authorities there, even in accordance with the Constitution. And then
that's obviously a commentary on the
he talks, and he talks a lot about the whole thing of the Constitution. I didn't want to talk about that again, about the Constitution and what the Constitution of Ukraine. And then, so the conditions, again, now he tells out this condition. So the conditions are very simple. Ukrainian troops must be completely withdrawn from the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics, the Kherson and Zaporozhye regions. Moreover, I draw attention to this, namely from the entire territory of these regions within their administrative borders that existed at the time of their entry into Ukraine. So that's that. So all of their borders. Those are the territorial boundaries.
Yeah, because I mean, what he's saying here is that the internal boundaries of Ukraine are now part of Russia's international boundaries.
That's right.
And that is not negotiable.
Right. And then as soon as they declare in Kiev that they are ready for such a decision and begin a real withdrawal of troops from these regions, and also officially notify about the abandonment of plans to join NATO, our side will immediately, literally at the same minute, follow the order to cease fire and start negotiations. So as soon as they declare, let's say, so as soon as they declare in Kiev that they are ready to take such a decision, they're ready to withdraw of troops from these regions and to notify about the abandonment of the plans to join NATO, our side immediately, literally, at the same minute, follow the order to cease fire. So that we just have a ceasefire. So Ukraine has to make a declaration. We will withdraw. We intend to withdraw our forces from these 4 regions, and we intend to abandon our plan to join NATO. At that moment, we will order a ceasefire. So we order a ceasefire, even though no Ukrainian forces have even begun to withdraw. They just simply have to announce the intent to withdraw. The moment they announce the intent to withdraw and the intent to abandon their plans to NATO, we will order a ceasefire.
Yes, but I mean that they're testing the goodwill
right
to fulfill that. I mean, okay, it could take, you know, these are, you know, large military operations.
Right.
I mean,
No, that you
it might take you a little bit of time, even if
it takes a long time to withdraw. Yeah.
Okay, but a couple of people have already talked about this, and I think a lot of people are missing the point. And it's important for George and I to express it here. Okay. Officially notify about the abandonment of plans to join NATO. Okay. Our side will immediately, literally say, follow an order to cease fire and start negotiation. This is the starting point of the negotiations, everybody. This isn't the end. This isn't the blueprint to end this. No, this is the epicenter to start negotiations, okay? Because we have a lot of other issues involved, denazification, these kind of things here. So I think a couple of people, again, people George and I tend to like, they're misunderstanding that we're looking at, this is not the end point. This is the beginning of negotiations.
Right. Yeah, no, that's right.
No, because it's being, this is the blueprint to end the war. No. This is the blueprint to stop hostilities. Now we have to go down the political path to find a political solution here. We need to end the conflict in terms of hostilities. Then we can start talking. That's how we should understand this.
Right. No, I think that's right. However, it's having said that, it'll be hard for, you know, to say, yeah, we intend to withdraw from these 4 regions wholly and retreat from all parts of within the administrative boundary. Because if you don't do it, I mean, it's going to take time to implement, right? It's not going to be implemented right away. But if you don't implement, then that could be the justification for resuming,
of course,
the hostilities. But
again, you know, we have the Belarus process, we have Istanbul, and now we have this. Okay, each time solutions are presented. Now, I understand how the Ukrainians feel about this. Okay, but irrespective of your feelings, these are the ways to stop the conflict, to start a negotiation that you rejected at the behest of your patrons. This is the third attempt. This is we can go down this path, or we can continue the way we were. This is important to point out. Right. And considering each time you say no, it gets worse and worse for you.
Right.
Ukraine.
Right. That's right.
And note everyone, there's no mention of Odessa in here. There's
No,
no
there's
mention
not exactly.
of
No,
Kharkov
that's the
here.
point. There's no mention of Odessa. There's no mention of Kharkov either. No mention of Odessa. No mention of Kharkov. And you know the Azov, anything like that. I mean the Azov Sea. So Ukraine still has the access to the Azov Sea. So naturally, at the same time, we guarantee the unhindered and safe withdrawal of Ukrainian units and formations. We, of course, would like to expect that such a decision on the withdrawal of troops and on non-aligned status, and on the beginning of a dialogue with Russia, on which the future existence of Ukraine depends, will be made independently in Kiev, based on the prevailing realities and guided by genuine national interests of the Ukrainian people, and not at Western orders, although there are, of course, great doubts about this. Yeah.
Well, I'm really glad he ended this sentence that way.
Right.
Yeah, you know, it's kind of like, you know, you have this like a hope meter, and you know, so you made independently in Kiev, it's very high in the meter. There's hope there based on prevailing realities. It goes a little down, guided by genuine national interests of the Ukrainian people, and then it hits zero.
Right. That's exactly. It is known that on February 21st, an agreement was signed between the then current president of Ukraine and the opposition to resolve the political crisis. That was then. Guarantors of Germany, Poland, and France. And then today I will say more about another important fact. He seems to have now gone back to this thing about this. We're going back now to 2014. And he says, well, now I'll say more. At the same time, a conversation with my American counterpart took place at the initiative of the American side. So this is Obama. The essence was as follows. The American leader unequivocally supported the Kiev agreement between the authorities and the opposition. He called it a breakthrough, a chance for Ukrainian people to prevent the violence that had broken out from going beyond all conceivable limits. This conversation was actually well known, but Putin has never talked about it explicitly because he said, well, I don't want to disclose the confidential conversations I have with foreign leaders, but everyone has known about this conversation that he had with Obama. And then it says,
what did Obama, he called it, he used very interesting language. I backed, we backed a political breakthrough or something. The administration crafted, you know, it was some very megalomaniac language.
Well, but that's it. But the thing was that the agreement was that, well, we will act to restrain. The Russians said, well, we will act to restrain Yanukovych if you can restrain the all the sort of the Maidan Nazis. And Obama said, yeah, okay, we'll do that. And of course, they didn't do anything of the sort. And then during the conversations, we jointly actually developed the following formula. Russia will try to convince the then current president of Ukraine to behave with maximum restraint, not to use the army and law enforcement agencies against the protesters. And the United States, according to so it was said, will call the opposition, as they say, to order to vacate administrative buildings to ensure that the streets calm down. And then you think,
what a double game.
You know, you're going to talk to Obama. You're going to believe anything Obama says. I mean, so anyway, because all this was supposed to create the conditions for life in the country to return to normal. We kept our word completely. Yeah, I mean, Yanukovych should have used force at a much earlier stage. The then president of Ukraine, Yanukovych, who in fact did not plan to use the army, nevertheless did not do this, and moreover even withdraw additional police units from Kiev. And what about our Western colleagues? On the night of February the 22nd, and then throughout the following day, Yanukovych left for Kharkov, where a Congress of Deputies of the southeastern regions of Ukraine and Crimea was to take place. The radicals, despite all the agreements and guarantees from the West, forcibly took control of the buildings of the Rada, the presidential administration, seized the government, And not a single guarantor of all these agreements and political settlements lifted a finger to fulfill their obligations. To call on the opposition to free the seized administrative facilities, to renounce the violence, it is clear that this course of events not only suited them, it seems they were the authors of the development events in
Well,
this.
they take great pride in it too.
They take great pride of it. Yeah. And of course, Yanukovych had every reason to flee for his life. I mean, once he saw what happened was in Kiev, he'd gone to Kharkov. So even that whole thing about a lie, oh, he left Kiev to go to Russia. He never did that. He left Kiev to attend this meeting at Kharkov, and then he saw what happened in Kharkov. And then in February 22, violation of the Constitution of Ukraine, adopted a resolution for the removal of Yanukovych and so on. This was a coup. And so we went through that. Then he just repeats how they went to the dialogue and so on. And then today we are making another concrete real peace proposal. If Kiev and the Western capitals reject it, then ultimately it is their business, their political and moral responsibility for the continuation of bloodshed. Obviously, the realities on the ground, on the line of combat, will continue to change to the detriment of the Kiev regime, and the conditions for starting negotiations will be different. Let me emphasize the main thing. The essence of our proposal is not some kind of a temporary truce or suspension of fire as the West wants in order to restore losses, rearm the Kiev regime, and prepare it for a new offensive. I repeat, we are not talking about freezing the conflict, but about its final completion. Anyway, that's the essence of his. It was a long
guy in the ether that can do this.
That's right. It was a long. But I think it's important to go through it. It's I know it was a little heavy going, but it's for the historical record, because the West very rarely hears any of this, the details of what happened, the diplomatic process and so on. We just say, oh, Putin wants to restore the Soviet Union.
What's so pathetic about this, George? Okay, I get the Ukraine thing with Western politicians and media and all that, but can they be challenged? Can their position be challenged? Are you open to be challenged?
Right.
I'm sure there's somebody smart, they know they could distill this down to a couple of pages and say, well, what's wrong with the logic?
Right.
What's wrong with it? I mean, is there a way to negotiate? See, this is in totality, they will not even recognize there's another position.
No.
At all.
No.
At all.
No, that's exactly right. And I think that what he did in this speech, he presented all of the important arguments. I mean, obviously he talked about the coup, the importance of the coup. Then he talked about the whole process, Minsk 1, Minsk 2, violations of that. Then he talked about the reasons why they decided to launch the so-called special military operation, the peace negotiations that Russia undertook, made a lot of concessions there, and now say that basically you've let us down, you lied to us time and time again. We're now going to just come along and say, well, we'll freeze the conflict, and then you're going to use the time of frozen conflict just to build up Ukraine and to start the whole thing up all over again. We just can't do this. And again, you have a problem, and Russia does have a problem, which is, how do you trust the West? I mean, you're dealing with people who have no intention, none, of sticking to any of their agreements. It's like, so they're going to lie to you if necessary, and then they're going to carry on doing the same thing as they've done before.
Yeah, well, they have to lie because they won't give any moral legitimacy, any political legitimacy to the other position. So, in their minds, lying is the right thing to do, because you can't speak truth to something that you think is so completely illegitimate. Okay, right. This is a really warped way of thinking about the world. We see this in other conflicts currently going on in the world too, and so the West is destined to the complete destruction of Ukraine if they don't change their position.
Right. well, it's even worse than that. I think the way they're going towards, heading towards war. It's not just in Ukraine.
Joe, you've been musing about this for as long as it's been going on, and I have to tell you and our audience, I'm completely resigned to it now.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because they only know one gear, they only know one direction, and they believe their own bullshit. Sorry,
Yes.
but that's how we got here. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
At least for the historical record, depending on, I don't know how this is all going to work out. Nobody does. But for the historical record, what was said in front of Russian diplomats, that's part of the historical record. I mean,
Right.
this is where we are right now.
Right.
It's really the other side that has to decide how it wants to move. Putin is telegraphed exactly what he wants and what he's going to do. I mean, it is more transparent than you get in anything out of like John Kirby or the
Right.
Matthew Miller, or all these other
Right.
jerks. Okay?
Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. And so when you get the position of the United States, the position of so Biden signed this agreement, the strategic partnership agreement, 10-year strategic partnership agreement with Ukraine, and essentially the United States committed to this maximalist position of somehow Ukraine going back to the 1991 borders. That's the United States position. Well, if you're going to go there, then ultimately, yeah, there's no other way of resolving this than armed conflict. I mean, and they're heading towards this. The positions of NATO, you got Macron and everyone else. We're just going forward we know why Russia's doing what they're doing. That's the point. We know exactly why Russia's doing it and why Russia is concerned about security. The real question will be, and this is historians are going to ask, why is the West doing this? What is it that's compelled you to go out like this, to risk the destruction of the planet for a country that is not an ally of yours, that you don't have a military alliance with?
It gets, for me, this is kind of messianic. They're endless indicators. We could talk about the global economy. We can look at changes of attitudes, the relative power of soft power. There's a lot of elements in play here. But one thing is for sure, is that the hegemonic grip that the United States, through its supplicants, it's loosening. And one thing that we obviously the global South is, they can be corralled into the General Assembly, raise your hand. It isn't really worth much. The attendance in this conference isn't worth very much either. But it is really quite obvious that they have this hegemonic impulse. They have to knock out the major competitors. Right. And they naively, stupidly believe, when you have like Fiona Hill is your expert on Russia. Right. I mean, it's no wonder we found ourselves in this situation. Knock out Russia, then focus your attention on China. That's the
plan. Yeah, exactly. But that's a very dangerous plan. I mean, when you're thinking about, well, I'll knock one great power out, then I'll be able to turn my attention to the next great power. That's how you get into a very serious disaster. It's like, we don't really like to talk about Hitler and Nazi Germany, but that was kind of his calculations. How does Germany succeed in exercising its hegemony in Europe? Well, we first of all have to knock one power out, and then we have to knock another power out. And then I first thought, well, I can knock out Great Britain, or at least Great Britain could sign an agreement. Well, when that didn't work out, well, okay, now I have to knock out the Soviet Union. Once I knock the Soviet Union out, then I can deal with the British Empire at a later stage. But in the end, you failed in both. But that's when you start, making these calculations, they don't end well.
Yeah, I mean, the day Nazi Germany invaded the Soviet Union was the day they lost the war.
They lost the war, exactly. But they thought, okay, well, now if we defeat the Soviet, it should be pretty easy. It's like calculate, it should be pretty easy defeating them. Then it'll force the British to come to a peace treaty, because they say, well, then everything is now hopeless. There's no, we can't possibly take on Nazi Germany. We have to surrender. But of course, it didn't really work out. They weren't able to knock out the Soviet Union, of course. So but that's again the calculation. Okay, we'll knock one out, and then we can deal with the other. And that's what the United States and NATO are thinking. Well, we'll knock Russia out, and then we'll deal with China.
But they're not looking. They're not in touch with reality. Okay, it's not working. It isn't going to work, and the NATO is creating the circumstances for a major escalation of this conflict.
Yeah.
And great powers, and I think NATO is an extension of American power. You don't go toe to toe.
No.
I mean, just isn't a good idea.
No.
Okay. I mean, one of the most remarkable things in modern history is that when you look at the outcome of the First World War, how many empires on both sides collapsed?
Yeah, no, that's it. Exactly.
No one went in August 1914, went in there and say, yeah, we're going to throw the dice. It's to be or not to be. Nobody went into that conflict thinking, well, okay, we might get hurt, we might lose, but we won't lose the empire, of course. And this is the same thinking right now. We could get a bloody lip and a black eye, but we're not going to, lose our hegemony. Well, you're on course of doing that.
Yeah. No, I think the United States can corral NATO. I mean, it's got bombed NATO. There's no way out. Once you're in NATO, you're in NATO. There's no exit. It's been made clear to Viktor Orban. There's no exit. We'll allow you to say, well, we're not going to use our territory for helping Ukraine, but basically you're part of the alliance. There's no escaping. But how do you succeed in achieving your military goals? I mean, it's based on a kind of the NATO idea is Russia will back down. I mean, that's all it is. The idea is Russia is more afraid of us than we are afraid of Russia, and Putin will back down. That's a very, very reckless way of thinking, because it just isn't going to happen. So if your military strategy based on the other side is going to back down, then you don't have much of a strategy.
Well, you better have a strategy and have something backing it up. I mean, the way I look at it is a lot of it has been pretty much potpourri as they've gone along. Oh, let's find some helmets in Spain, and let's find some submachine guns in Slovenia. That's hodgepodge, okay? But think about it, George. You and I grew up with when NATO during its heyday, if it ever had one. Okay, I mean, this military alliance that was there just in case, okay? And that's all it was. So when Poland was joining the alliance, I really wish, I could have said at the time, maybe by joining this alliance that your military installations could be destroyed by another country. Do you think everyone in the bloc is going to come and protect you? Let me rephrase that. So the Biden administration now is giving us this proposition that if a airfield, a NATO or Polish or whatever you want to call it, is attacked by Russian military, is the United States willing to trade that for Memphis?
No, that's it. Yeah. I think that's the problem with Duda, as we talked about him, already quite a while ago. But Duda doesn't seem to accept that. Yeah, you're in the front line. You're going to get thumped. You have limited means at your disposal to thump Russia back. The United States is not going to start, risking its own cities for you. So, you want to think carefully, but when you start, you want to fight war with Russia. I mean, it's obvious you're itching for a war with Russia, but you got to be sure about who is going to come in on your side.
But see, George, this is what is so frustrating, is that's what deterrence was all about. The United States and the Soviet Union would not trade major cities. That's why deterrence worked, everybody. But if you don't play the game of deterrence, then what happens? Okay? I mean, Duda, the ultimate unmasking there. We see, we saw it with Napoleon, we saw it with the Nazis. Well, we could even go look at the Second World War, then the Nazis. This is all part and parcel of the destruction of Russia. It's
Right.
all seamless, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's right.
And of course, Duda, he has a cutout. It's called Ukraine, but it could be any other country. I mean, it doesn't matter. This
Right.
is what the objective is. He says the quiet part out loud.
Yeah, yeah.
And you know what, George? The Russians can read the speech too.
Yeah. Yeah, no,
They can read the speech too.
wait. And I'm sure that they're going to publicize this and say, hey, this is your guy. This is this is Poland. This is the front and center of NATO. This is the new NATO. This is what he's talking about. This is, and we've said the plans that are being hatched in the West are about dismantling and destroying Russia. And oh, Putin, paranoia. No, here it is. This was the president of Poland has just said this. This isn't some crazy think tank somewhere, in which no one pays any attention. This is the president of Poland who's just said this. And we had Biden, when we said this man cannot be allowed to stay in power. You blurted these things out, and then you want to pretend that they never happened. We are at war with Russia. That never happened. I never said we are at war with Russia.
Lloyd Austin said this is all about weakening Russia.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Very dreary, everyone. We try to be, most of the time we are dispassionate. Sometimes we're very passionate, let's be honest, okay? But the writing's on the wall.
Yeah. Right.
Okay. Putin has said these are the conditions in which we can start talks. Cessation of hostilities, and we have serious talks. It's on the table.
Right.
It's on the table. No one in the West will report it.
No, that's what exactly. That's exactly it. Just propaganda. I think
lies. The West is doing this at all of our peril. Okay. Yeah. All of our peril. And when you look at that ridiculous confab in Switzerland, there was no talk of peace. No talk of security. If you're not going to talk about peace and you're not going to talk about security, we're not going to get anywhere. And Ukraine will just get smaller and smaller.
But NATO has no intention of talking about peace. That's it. It's now clear, that their peace is Russian capitulation. In other words, you have no interest in peace. And there's no one, and that's the thing.
But you can't have peace without security, Mr. Stoltenberg.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's NATO is essentially its plan is to inflict total defeat on Russia. That's it. That's what it's saying. It's when they say Putin can just simply withdraw from Ukraine. Well, Putin's not going to do that. So in other words, your goal, and then Biden says, oh, yeah, Ukraine within its 1991 borders. In other words, total defeat for Russia. That's now your goal. Okay, so that's it. So, and again,
if I had been in the, I think it was John Kirby that said, Russia just has to leave Ukraine. Well, a more intrepid journalist, maybe Max Blumenthal will make it there one day for us and say, well, if you want the Russians to do that, why don't you tell the Ukrainians you can't join NATO? Huh?
Right.
Huh?
Right.
No.
Yeah. No question.
Mine is mine. What yours is negotiable. It's always that. It's always that.
Right.
All right, everybody. That's our mega Sunday. Mega. How many slides were there? Because I didn't count.
There's a lot of slides, but
come on. You know the number. How many?
It has to be in the terms of about half a century, like about 50.
Well, see, I had just put an apple down on the floor. You hit that. I turned you away.
Right.
And then I came back and I didn't see the number of slides. So.
Yeah, it was
well worth the effort, George.
Exactly. It's a historical record. So maybe hard going, but people will be looking back upon this, in years to come.
Bucolic Sunday evening with George. Okay.
Right. Exactly.
All right, everybody. This is the Galgo with Peter and George. We're on Local, so please go to thegalgo.locals.com. George and I will convene tomorrow. We're hoping.
Exactly. We'll have a live stream. Exactly.
Okay. We're not the most techie people, right?
Yeah.
I think that's understood. Okay. Right. And if not, we'll do a regular podcast, and George will be back on Tuesday.
Yeah. And then Tuesday, 3 p.m. Eastern time, please join me. Come with comments, criticisms, suggestions, ideas, opinions. And then think about, oh, look at that. Think about, the situation with the tip jar, which is very, very unfavorable. So much so that Johnny Apple is saying, I'm losing interest in the tip jar. They've got other things on my mind. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'm very materialistic, he says.
Money, no honey. Oh, come on.
Exactly. And I'm not interested in reflections on the world. I'm just interested in the ka-ching. So if you want to keep these hounds happy, you whip out a few bob from your pocket, dunk them in the tip jar. Maybe it'll put them in a better mood. We're very grateful for all of your help, friendship, and support. The more you're able to donate, the more of these videos we can make, the more we can improve the technology, and the more likely it is that one day these ferocious hounds will will put feel more positively towards us. So remember, if you like the gaggle, please like, share, and subscribe. See you soon. Bye.